first glance, OneShot is just a story, like thousands of other stories. However, it quickly becomes apparent that there is much more to this game than meets the eye. As the Steam page so clearly states, the world knows you exist. And because of that awareness, the world can adapt and evolve over time. So the true magic of OneShot, at least in my opinion, is that the scope of the game fundamentally changes the further you get into it. Just like an onion is composed of many rings, OneShot 2 is a layered game. When you as a player think you know what's going on, the world reveals another layer to make you question what came before. Every layer has something worthwhile to appreciate, but in total it still forms a cohesive whole. And just like with an onion, the further you get into it, the more you might start crying. Today, I'd like to delve deep into 6.5 layers that I think define the world of OneShot. We'll take things slowly. Things will seem superficial and literal at first, but gradually the layers will get more symbolic and self-referential. You might even learn some life lessons along the way. And eventually, we'll end up at the center, where I have one simple question. The sacred kernel, if you will. What is OneShot truly about? As I said, we'll start off simple. OneShot is that game with Nico in it. You know, the child who looks like a cat but definitely isn't. Even if you haven't seen or heard of OneShot, you might still recognize the little goober. You can find them in numerous memes, fan art, a Celeste skin, and even a 10th anniversary OneShot game on itch.io. I'd say their appearance is the main reason why. No other character looks like them. So yeah, it's clear that they're an iconic character, to the point where they feel real even outside of the game. I know this might feel like a yap, but this conclusion will become relevant later, so let's put a pin on it. It's also worth noting how this game came to be. I played this on Steam, where the game first appeared in 2016, but it already existed before then as a smaller game from 2014 made in RPG Maker 2003. I'm not going to talk about RPG Maker too much because that would distract us from the point of the video, but just know that it was and still is an incredibly popular tool to make role-playing games. In the past it was used a lot for fan games and freeware, but in more recent years it's also been used for commercial titles. OneShot is no exception to this trend. The original 2014 version was freeware, while the Steam version and the later released World Machine Edition for consoles and the Steam Deck are of course commercial. I happily paid money to play this. I am not going to dwell on the version differences too much, especially considering I myself have only played the Steam release, but I'll mention them here and there when they're relevant. With that out of the way, let's talk about the game's opening. The game begins with Nico waking up in an unknown place, and after solving a simple code, they log onto the computer. Surprisingly, it starts talking to us, and with that I don't mean Nico. The computer is literally addressing the player, telling them that this world is not worth saving and that our mission is to help Nico leave. Most importantly, we only have one shot. Nico logs off, and we can continue with some more puzzles. In the end, they pick up the sun, the single most important item in the game and in the promotional art. They exit the unknown building, at which point we get introduced to the world of OneShot. It consists of 4 major areas in a sort of concentric circle layout. We start in the perimeter, in the Barrens, a deserted area mostly dominated by industry, robots, and toxic fumes. The second area is further in and is called the Glen. This is a much more lively place, populated by bird people and nature, and surrounded by water. After that is the Refuge, a city in the center of the world where most people now reside. Finally, the tower at the very center of the world seems to extend up infinitely, suggesting that it's maybe out of this world entirely. Each area also has its own color. The Barrens are blue because of the blue phosphor, the Glen has green phosphor and fireflies, and the Refuge has red phosphor. Phosphorus shrimp are the main source of light right now, so they'll be a recurring motif. So what are we supposed to be doing here anyway? Well, the first character we encounter, the Prophet Bot, was designed to tell us just that. It turns out that Nico is actually the messiah of this world, tasked to deliver the sun to the top of the tower. The old sun went out a while ago, and since then the world has been on the brink of death. Since the sun is the world's only remaining hope, shattering it will end the world in an instant. Note the way that Prophet Bot talks. He mentions the sun, the Messiah, your pilgrimage, etc. Also, he only speaks in capitalized words, so I give him a funny accent to match. Our world was not always this dim, nor was it so broken. But time waits for nobody, not even saviors. Alright, 2 more bits of lore and then we can continue. The player, that's me, actually plays a vital role in the story, because apparently I'm the god of this world? I mean, in a way it makes sense, but that's a large responsibility to carry. Anyway, Nico seems to be the only character who can communicate directly with the player. And one more thing. If that all sounds interesting to you, don't be afraid to pause the video right now and go play the game for yourself. Each layer will naturally have more spoilers than the last, so I won't bite if you choose to leave at any point. Right now though, let's pin some important aspects from this layer. I think our mission is fairly important, so let's pin that. And we might also pin the layout of the world, and sure, the shrimp and the religious terms seem interesting as well. In this layer, I'll first talk about OneShot's gameplay, dialogue, and world building in general, and then I'll give a rundown of what happens in the Barrens, the Glen, and the Refuge specifically. This will be a longer section, but I think it's important that I equip you with the info you need to understand what happens in the deeper layers. For example, in layer 2, we'll try to interpret what we saw and how it might be a metaphor for something deeper. Going back to the Steam description, OneShot is listed as a puzzle adventure game. The core gameplay loop mostly consists of walking around, picking up items to solve puzzles, and dialogue. And to make it less tedious, there's a fast travel system as well. It sounds really dull when I say it like that, but that's the point. The gameplay is inherently simple, to make the lore and world building stand out. There's a reason this game doesn't have a complex combat system or a health bar. It just wouldn't add anything. The puzzles are certainly not trivial, but they're not impossibly difficult either. The only thing you could reasonably struggle with is what items to combine. Actually, speaking of puzzles, there are a few that don't follow our gameplay loop. For example, this puzzle with a vault has a meta-level solution. You have to open up your Documents folder on your computer, where a file has been added with the code. I won't spoil the others right now, but we'll get to those later anyway. For this point in the game though, these are mostly cool gimmicks. You're also often told exactly what to do, with a hint to spell it out if necessary, so that's a plus. Oh no. Glitches. As you can tell, the main gameplay loop really does not do a whole lot to interest the player, so the dialogue and world building have to do most of the heavy lifting. Let's first turn our attention to the dialogue. To ensure that the game remains fun and doesn't feel like reading a book, a good chunk of the early dialogue is quirky and inconsequential. Nico's limited knowledge of this world, but also of their own world, makes for some hilarious moments. Talking about basic life facts, Nico doing a stereotypical robot impression and being called out for it. I am a robot and I eat batteries instead of normal people. This is so stupid, I love this. That is not correct. Nico being bloody terrible at chess. Yeah, you can tell Nico has played this the game of chess a lot when they say little horse instead of knight. And most importantly, cactus. The dialogue really possesses this childlike innocence, which makes you relate to Nico's situation, even if it is contrived. In terms of world building, the Barrens mostly accomplishes this with notes and images scattered throughout the land. This gives us an idea of what the industry was like before everything went downhill. Some of these notes are also key elements for solving puzzles, so the two are definitely linked. There are other games which achieve this link between gameplay and story a bit better in my opinion, for example Celeste and Chicory, but those are a topic for another video. The game also does a great job of showing instead of telling. For example, most of the power has gone out in the Barrens, save for a few contraptions and Prophet Bot. But we don't need to be told that this place is in shambles, we feel it. One more exception to the power outage I mentioned is the head engineer, named Silver, who is powered by this backup power cell. In contrast with Prophetbot, she seems to talk normally. She's also much more pessimistic, telling us that the sun might not save the world after all. If we now go back to Prophetbot, he has some more things to explain. Unlike what you may have been led to believe earlier, Prophetbot is not the prophet. He's merely programmed to retell the prophecy. And that's literally everything he knows. He doesn't wander around, he knows nothing else about the world, but it's all okay because I have not been tamed. What's being tamed, you might ask? Well, the game doesn't provide an immediate answer, so I'm not going to either. You're just gonna have to figure it out yourself as we go. One of the later robots also talks about it, but again doesn't explain what it is. I will put a pin on it though. Up next, we have a whole load of puzzles that I admittedly spent way too much time on. That does raise an interesting point though. So the lore of this game is telling me that I am the god of this world, but I know nothing about this world. Like, I am just clueless. How did that work exactly? After all was said and done, we brought power back to the Barrens and fixed up this robot. I also saved the game twice during all this. There are two ways to do that in this game. The first is by letting Nico go to bed. You'll find 1 or 2 beds per region. Entering one will close the application, and upon reopening, you're greeted to a dream that Nico has. After that, they talk a bit with the player about what their world is like, which makes you really empathize with them more. You can only use each bed once though, so the other way to save your game is to forcefully quit the application. This feature was not present in the original 2014 version of OneShot. If you closed your game there, you would get a message saying that Nico is dead. Yeah, you really only had one shot in that game. However, I think you could see why that would be frustrating, especially if you have a power outage or a computer crash. So in the newer versions, this happens instead. Thomas, can you hear me? Yeah? Oh, phew. What happened? Everything went pitch black for a second. I'm glad it was just a second, and not, because I haven't booted up this game in a week and a half. The save system still feels out of place though, so I'm going to pin it. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. While solving the puzzles in this area, we acquired a strange journal that we can't read yet, and a piece of amber given to us by the head engineer. Notice how both of them have the symbol of a clover on them. Clovers will be one of the most important motifs throughout the game, but for now, we don't really know why they're on both of these key items. Before leaving the Barrens, we played chess with the head engineer, and completely lose. She does say a lot of noteworthy things though. She can't really explain what taming is, but she does say that she is tamed. Whatever this taming property is, it seems important and unique to certain characters. Later, Silver again mentions that the sun might not save the world because the decay already started before the sun went out, whatever that is. This whole conversation seems important though, so let's pin it. After that exchange, we set off towards the glen in this adorable little cutscene. Before we say goodbye to Robot, he again says,
"It's okay. I have not been tamed."
The glen is almost the complete opposite of the Barrens. It's mostly filled with nature, most of the inhabitants are real people, or bird people I guess, and there are only a few robots around. The area was ravaged by floods not long ago, as you can see in these houses. Again, showing without telling. Or, in this case, with telling, I guess. Either way, we meet this guy called Calamus, and he tells us his sister Alula has gone missing. To find her, we must explore the ruins and get rid of these vines. Turns out those are here because of this plant lady called Maze, who is currently dying. We leave the sun with her for a bit and make the vines recede. In the nearby village, we learn from the NPCs that the lack of a sun has been disastrous for this place. Crops has been failing, the land is sinking, etc. All of this information is told in little bits by different characters instead of in one lore dump, which again is a sign of good world building. Now we must solve another meta puzzle to save Alula. The code appears on your desktop wallpaper this time. Last time we solved one of these puzzles, some squares appeared in front of us, but this time they go away after solving it. That's odd. Calamus later tells us that we should just avoid them at all costs. After saving Alula, Calamus is so grateful that he invites Nico to their house. He also owns one of those clover-marked books, and as it turns out, a friend of his wrote it. so we can assume that the strange journal that we got was written by him as well. We also pick up a feather from them, which we can use to leave the area and move on to the refuge. But first, we need to pick up the sun.
Oh. Oh. The light's gone out. Thomas, do you know what happened? No? You really? But, oh. What am I gonna do? Oh. Okay. I really... My heart rate really went up there. I'm not even kidding. It lit up again? Phew, she's gone. Oh, there's something on the ground here. It looks like a kernel of corn. She must have left it behind.
All in all, this area has a lot less lore and much more of a welcoming vibe to it, which is a nice change of pace from what we had previously. While traveling to the last region, Nico is almost killed by some squares. We start above the refuge on a series of catwalks. Get it? Cause Nico's a cat? Anyway, we first need to reach the ground, or the surface as it's called here, and then find the library. There's an elevator downward, but it doesn't work, and this average middle-aged worker doesn't seem to have any clue on how to fix it. This leads to another sequence of pretty fun puzzles, including one meta-level puzzle where you need to drag the game window outside of your screen. But I know you're not interested in all of that. You're here for the real content, and that's why I'm proud to announce that today's sponsor is Nico on a Roomba. No, not a Goomba. Look, it's Nico on a Roomba.
Well, that was fun. That was an achievement.
Anyway, after an awkward elevator ride, we reach the surface. There are some interesting bits of dialogue here which might be worth pinning for later.
Tell me, do you think you can fix the world with the sun? Honestly, I don't know. I've been getting mixed messages. I know. I will take your faith for an answer then. What do you mean by that? It means whatever you think it means. When the world ends, would it be better if it was gone in an instant or slowly fading away?
We also get jump scared by a dream of some sort. Upon entering the library, the NPCs give us lots of information about this guy called the Author, who was briefly mentioned earlier in a note in the Barrens, but this is where we learn all about him. He wrote many of the books here and is so prolific that this guy questions whether it was even mathematically possible for him to write it all. I theorize the author might actually be multiple people, like in the famous real-world case of Nicolas Bourbaki, a revolutionary mathematician who was actually multiple people. Either way, the author travels a lot with his flying machine and mostly writes about what he encounters, but no one has seen him recently. Most importantly of all, however, clovers appear everywhere in the library. That means we can say with reasonable confidence that the author also wrote the strange journal. And considering everyone here seems to talk about him, let's pin him. There are like 4 more things in the refuge that I want to mention, and then we can move on to layer 2. First of all is this robot who warms up the cats, and rightfully assumes that Nico is a cat as well. It's not super interesting, besides the fact that it seems to have flexible programming and doesn't talk in capitalized words or all caps, so he might be a tamed robot too. Secondly, at one point we meet a fox, but she says she cannot talk with us right now.
But can you promise me something? If you can find a way to return, please do. What do you mean by that?
Strange and worth a pin. Thirdly, while solving some puzzles, we meet with Dr. Kip Silverpoint, the head researcher of this place, who seems surprisingly optimistic. Nico points out that she looks a lot like the robot named Silver from the Barrens, and as it turns out, Silver is actually based on Dr. Silverpoint, so that assumption was pretty correct. She was supposed to be a robot that talks and acts just like a human being, but she went rogue and had to be toned down. Well, we know for a fact that she's tamed, so it must have something to do with that. All of this is again worth pinning. Lastly, after finishing the rest of the puzzles, we can enter the head librarian's office. She's called George and can finally translate the strange journal for us. Before that though, we can read some of the books in the library. We read about Calamus's dad Rachis and his relationship with the author and the great prophet. We learn about how clovers are able to grow in every area, and about how ProfitBot was made. After reading all of that, Nico goes to bed. Alright, I know that was a lot of information to take in, but the rest of the layers just wouldn't make sense without it. Now we can try to make connections among what we have. So far, we've taken mostly everything at face value. That changes now, because in this layer, I'd like to hypothesize what the deeper meaning of this game might be. Specifically, we're looking for allegories, and these are narratives where the places, characters, or events have a moral or political significance. In other words, there's more to it than you'd think at first glance. I'm going to show you 3 completely different theories that I entertained while playing through this part of the game. Some, none, or all of these may be relevant later, so for each one, try to guess whether it will prevail or not. First of all is the most obvious one. Nico is the Messiah, I'm supposedly God, this is a pilgrimage, this guy will take our faith for an answer, etc. These terms all clearly relate to religion, more specifically Christianity. The tower could then represent the place where Nico ascends, explaining why it's seemingly infinitely tall. The head engineer also talks about Nico being here as a sort of second chance for the people. And if there's anything I learned in my religion class, it's that God is all about second chances. At least for those who actually feel guilt for their sins. Finally, the short dream we had was kind of prophetic in a way, referring to something that happened later. Secondly, the way that industry ruined the Barrens closely resembles how we're ruining the planet at the moment. Could this game be an allegory for climate change, where Nico is here as a savior? I know it sounds ridiculous, and I initially proposed it as a joke, but the more you think about it, the more it starts to make sense. We only have one shot, and we only have one Earth. It would also explain the 3 areas. The Barrens could represent fossil fuel companies. The Glun could represent the regions that contribute the least to climate change, but are most affected by it, like Africa. And the Refuge could represent the regions of the world profiting from all this, for example the West. And most striking of all in my opinion, at one point the head engineer literally says that the sun going out was a tipping point for further decay. That's a very specific wording, and I feel this was done on purpose. There are many other parallels I could draw, but for now let's leave it at that. Finally, a more logical and less depressing theory. There are a lot of references to computers and machinery in the game. If you look again at the map of the world, notice how the Barrens is blue, the Glen is green, and the Refuge is red. Putting these together in reverse order gives RGB or red, green, blue, which are exactly the colors used in a TV monitor, computer, camera, or really anything digital that isn't a color printer. If you zoom in on the structure of a computer or camera pixel, it actually consists of a grid of red, green, and blue pixels, which combine together to give every other color. That seems too perfect to be a coincidence, right? And considering the high amount of robots in the Barrens, the glitches in the landscape, and the concept of taming in robots, it seems like this theory might stand the test of time just as much as the other 2. That's all 3 of them. Notice how the tower isn't explained by any theory, except maybe the one about religion, but that was a bit of a long shot. That's not necessarily a sign that these are all wrong, but that we're still lacking information. So let's enter the tower now. Oh, also, heads up, there will be a lot of spoilers in this next layer, so feel free to pause the video if you need to. As I've alluded to earlier, this game has more to it than just being a puzzle adventure. Certain characters or interactions break the 4th wall. So far we've encountered 2 such individuals. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to call these the meta-level characters from now on. Each of them has a different way of communicating with the world, a different personality, and a different identity. First of all, we've got the being inside of the computers and pop-up boxes. If you remember from way earlier, the first thing it told us was that the world was doomed and we should just really get Nico out of here. It's also always been a fairly hostile character, especially towards the player. We'll learn its name soon, but for now, let's call it the computer guy as a placeholder, I guess. Secondly, and less obviously, the player themselves is meta because we control the world, specifically Nico, from above. I mean, according to this game, I'm literally God. I'm also the only character who can communicate directly with Nico through dialogue options. You could also argue that Nico is meta, but I wouldn't say that quite yet, because they're not aware of the fourth wall breaking nature of the game in the same way that I am or the computer guy is. Put differently, they don't understand anything of what the computer guy explains to the players, so they aren't really on the same level. We'll come across one more meta level character very soon, but before that, let's pick up where we left off in the story. This time around, Nico's dream is actually more of a nightmare, because as they're sitting at home, they notice the light bulb has been shattered. And for the first time, there's no wholesome dialogue after the dream. Nico is understandably shocked by what they just saw. In the meantime, the strange journal has been translated. In it, the author addresses the player directly and talks about the entity, a being who communicates through computers and other machinery but has no physical form. Well, that's the computer guy I mentioned earlier. And considering the author is both aware of the player and the entity, he's definitely a meta level character as well. His medium of communication is through books and scraps of paper. He seems benevolent, but he doesn't tell us a lot about this elusive entity. Now we've covered all of the meta level characters in the game. Note how there are 3 of them. This may just be a coincidence, of course, but there are also 3 leaves on every clover we see in the game. And hold on a second. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I'm probably just seeing things. Now we're almost ready to enter the tower, but first, Nico's a bit hungry. We head to the nearby cafe where the bartender prepares Nico's favorite food, pancakes. This reminds them of what life at home was like, and they start crying because they've been away for so long. I really empathized with Nico in this scene, and that's odd when you think about it. Nico is just a character in a video game, yet they feel so real. Why is that? Well, going back to what happened earlier, remember how every time you go in the beds, you get a dream and, most of the time, some wholesome dialogue afterward. I think it's that dialogue specifically that makes Nico feel like a real human being. Sure, some of the other bits are funny, but these parts where Nico directly interacts with the player and talks about the most mundane things like the ocean, the sun, what cities are like, those are the ones that add depth to their character. Because it's here where we learn that Nico has a life outside of the game, and it's that makes them feel alive. Going back to the present moment, Nico starts to doubt everything they've been told. Can they even save the world at this point, or is it going to die out anyway? And because of what led up to this moment, I as the player shared the same doubt. After that intermission, we can finally enter the tower. A hint from earlier tells us that we need to close the game in this room. That immediately establishes that the tower will probably be full of meta level elements like this. Upon reopening the game, Nico finds themselves in an unfamiliar dark location. However, the sun is gone and the player can no longer communicate with Nico. The only thing that is here is the entity. It tries to trick Nico into thinking I'm not here anymore, which is simply a lie because, as you can tell, we're still clearly playing the game. Then it says that Nico has saved the world already? I mean, this feels wrong. Everything about this entity indicates that it's trying to hide a dark secret. It even communicates with me for a second to dissuade me from reopening the game.
Please don't return to this world anymore. Something doesn't feel right here. Do you want me to reboot the game or not? I'm asking you right now, the viewers, because you have not had a say in this yet. This can't be the ending.
But of course, we do, and what's about to happen is so wacky that I'm putting it in the next layer entirely. I am giving you one last chance to bail out for spoilers if you want to. But please be warned, the way this game ends is entirely unexpected, and definitely worth experiencing yourself if you can. When reopening the game, our desktop wallpaper changes again, and then the game just closes. On our desktop, there's a note, probably from the author, because there's a clover, and it tells us to check a specific folder on our computer. In it, we find an executable file that shows us a clover. When we reboot the game with this clover file open, something different happens. Nico gets another dream where they run back to their village, but we stop them. The entity is furious that we did this and tries to trap us in an endless maze. But luckily, the Clover file now has notes from the author that guide us to where we need to go. All of the meta level puzzles so far have built up to this moment. While navigating this maze, we also learn a lot about the author and the entity. Apparently, the entity is notorious for silencing whoever learns of its true nature. The player and author are immune to this silencing though, presumably because we're meta-level characters ourselves. In this whole exchange, the author seems fairly transparent and gives all the information he can. He warns us of the entity's power and how it really only seeks death. He wants us to understand the world through all the books he wrote, and makes clear that he himself has already left the world. He also seems a bit insecure, but I can't blame him. This is a really difficult position to be in. It's here that a major plot twist happens. Remember how I said earlier that our mission was to save the world and to get Nico home? Well, as it turns out, those two goals are fundamentally incompatible. Because in order to save the world, Nico needs to put the sun at the top of the tower. However, in order to go home, it turns out that Nico actually needs to shatter the sun, because it's the only thing tying Nico to the world. We don't get an explanation as to why that works, but the author is telling us this, so I'm inclined to trust him. Besides, we really don't have anything else to go off. So, now we're faced with a moral dilemma. Do we shatter the sun to save Nico? Or do we keep it intact to save the world? Suddenly, this has become a matter of life and death. But before I tackle that question, we should communicate with Nico again. The sun is currently out, but as we've just learned, that's because that's Nico's tie to the world. So once Nico grabs it, it glows again. This happened earlier with Maze 2. Suddenly, we're transported back to the unfamiliar dark location from the start of the game. It's here that the entity talks to us again. It repeats its belief that Nico is the only thing worth saving here, because the world is already doomed as it is. And it also reminds us that Nico is not aware of anything that just happened, so we should at least tell them. I'll play this next part without talking over it, because I think it deserves to be seen in full.
Sure was taking a while. I guess this elevator leads to the top of the tower, Thomas. How do I tell him? Are you excited? We're finally gonna save the world. And I know it's for real this time, because you're here. And then I'll get to go home for real this time too. Can't wait to see everyone again. How do I tell him? Are you okay? You seem a little quiet. Nico. Yeah? Need to tell you something. I'm listening. We can't save both. The world and you. What's that supposed to mean? To send you home, we must break the light bulb. What? But won't that end the world? Yes. I want that to happen. Oh my god, this music. Okay. I just need a couple seconds. Okay, so what happens when we save the world? What happens to me? I don't know. You don't?
Oh god, is it just me or did that scene send chills down your spine? Before I show you what happens next, I'd like to talk about something else first. Something which often goes underappreciated in games like this. The music. The track that plays here is called Pretty. I initially assumed it was meant to be ironic because the emotions that the player and Nico are going through in this scene are anything but pretty. But actually, there's a deeper connection here with some of the other tracks in the game. Earlier, when traversing from the glen to the refuge, we heard a track called Pretty Bad, which sounds like this. And do you want to guess what the quirky elevator music from earlier is called? Pretty nice day, huh? And now we're in an elevator with music that sounds like Pretty Bad, so it makes sense that this track is called Pretty. That's not the only noteworthy thing about this theme though. It's also a major exception to a silent rule that the game otherwise follows. When something important happens, cut out the music. As you probably just noticed, sudden silence like this is very effective at grabbing your attention. And that's because it forces you to confront whatever is in front of you. There's this quote from Iris Murdoch which perfectly summarizes this phenomenon. For most of us, for almost all of us, truth can be attained, if at all, only in silence. It is in silence that the human spirit touches the divine. Expanding on that idea, it is in silence that we are most vulnerable. There's no more soothing background music to distract us from the truth. But wait a second, I just said that pretty is an exception to that. Well, it's more of an extension of this concept. When we talk to Nico again and teleport to the starting house, there's some relatively comforting background music called I'm Here. When the entity then talks to you, the music is cut out to emphasize these pop-ups. But in the elevator, the game wants to amplify our emotions even more, so we transition from silence to pretty. I think you can see now why it's so effective. Let's turn our attention to the music itself now. Pretty is inherently a simple electronic theme, but the sounds have a harsh quality to them, and the whole thing feels fragmented in a way. That matches up pretty well, see what I did there, with what the player is feeling and what Nico is about to experience in this scene. The player was already robbed of their innocence before this scene, but now we have to convey that information to Nico, who, I remind you, is a child. That's inherently a difficult thing to do, which matches with the harsh electronic sounds. Also, Nico is still living in the fantasy that they can save the world and go home, not either or. So there's a divide between what the player feels and what Nico feels, which could explain why the theme is so fragmented. I should emphasize that this is my personal interpretation, and you may have a completely different, but still valid viewpoint on this, so let me know in the comments what you think. Before we move on, I'd like to talk about some of the other parts of the soundtrack. I could talk about the OST for hours, but for the sake of time, I've picked a few things to focus on. First of all, the game loves to link up certain events or characters through the music. For example, Silver the Robot and Dr. Silverpoint the Person both share the same track called Silverpoint. Whenever Nico talks to us after a dream, the track Into the Light plays. When the entity is present, we hear A God's Machine, which has harsh sounds, just like in Pretty. Here's an interesting one. The tower features some broken up chords, which match up exactly with a sound effect from the tutorial on how to control the game. This establishes a link between the two ends of the game. You could even argue that the tutorial teaches the player on how to interact with Nico in the world, while the tower music reminds you of this fact before your ability to communicate with Nico is stripped away. This recontextualizes the sound effect from the start of the game, which, by the way, isn't exclusive to this game, other games do it as well. I won't spoil why, but if you've played AI The Somnium Files, you'll know what I mean. But this game is still a really good example of how to do it. Furthermore, as we saw earlier, the music often mirrors what is happening in the game. A good example of this is the track Countdown. Yeah, it literally sounds like a clock ticking. Some tracks will also have multiple versions with differing tempos or instrumentation to represent that the atmosphere in an area has changed. Good examples of this are the tracks Library Stroll and Library Nap. Finally, the two versions of the Glun's main theme are called To Sleep and To Dream. Which reminds me of the famous To Be or Not to Be excerpt from Hamlet. By the way, speaking of to be or not to be, we should return to our dilemma now. We enter the top room of the tower, where the title screen music starts playing. This is another example of recontextualization, but let's not pussyfoot around. We have a choice to make. Save the world, or save Nico? Well, we don't really know what happens to Nico when we save the world, do we? Do they die? Do they keep existing in the world? Or do they ascend in some sort of biblical fashion? I think it's best that I show you my thought process.
We're all going to die at some point, so maybe the fact that we're prolonging the life of the world is better than just giving one person a long life. If you have a life support system, you're not going to turn that off for someone. If you have that option, even if it only prolongs their life by a couple of weeks, those weeks can still mean a lot to that person. I need to admit to something here. I actually knew about this. And this was one of the main reasons I didn't want to play this game on stream, or just at all, because I knew about this choice. I did not know that the build-up of this would be so intense that even though I knew what was going to happen, I'm still feeling really tense about it. Like, I genuinely don't know what to do. Like, at the start of the game, I was like, okay, I am definitely going to save the world, obviously. And now I don't know anymore. Now it's just, oh my god. I don't remember anything else. I don't even remember what happens in the actual endings. I just know that this choice is a choice that you're faced with. I've built up way too much of a connection with this character throughout the game. It's, honestly, you would think it's just a bunch of pixels, like, but you really resonate with them really quickly. If we save the world, we are saving more than one person. If we don't save the world, we are only saving one person. Would you sacrifice one person to save the world? But if it's someone you don't care deeply about. This is just a trolley problem. This is the most contrived thing ever. Like, the trolley problem is so out of touch with reality, but we're being confronted with it in this video game. What did my gut say? My gut said, save the world. And this game has tried to prove to me that the world is worth saving, but also that it's not worth saving. And maybe this is all just a lie, and maybe the world can live on forever, for whatever definition of whatever, forever you want to accept. I mean, the universe is going to die at some point. No one will be around to witness it, but I don't think anyone's worried about that. Thomas, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? F it. I don't care. We're doing it. I'm actually not going to show you what happens next, because the choice you make here is personal. Remember this bit of dialogue? It means whatever you think it means. Your beliefs, values, and morals will shape how you make this choice. So that makes every player and playthrough unique by definition. Why should I show you what happens in my playthrough specifically? You should make that choice. Play the game for yourself and make that change. Now, even if you come to the same conclusion as I did, you may do so for different reasons. Like, there was a good IRL friend of mine who was in the chat, and he didn't really care about saving Nico, but wanted to heal the world instead. That's fair too. And if you save Nico instead of the world, more power to you.
Okay, but now what? We had one shot, we used it in a way that we thought was right, so isn't that just the end of the story? Return? Oh, as in return to the world? But how? Well, it is possible. That in itself is already a spoiler, but maybe you were like me and didn't know it was an option. If you want, you can again click off the video here and discover for yourself how to return. For everyone else though, let's move on to layer 5. For some reason, I didn't immediately check my documents folder again after beating the game. If I had, I would have noticed a new note from the author. In it, he tells us that the entity is named OneShot, implying that the entity actually might be the game itself. That would make sense. The author communicates in the .exe file, the entity through oneshot.exe, and I interact with both of those files on my computer. Even though we can't remove the one-shot restriction, we can delete our save data. Can we really just start the game anew? Wouldn't that defeat the entire point? I mean, it would also allow me to get some of the achievements that I missed, but then I'm just playing this as a video game. I don't want to get complacent. This game was more than a video game. But somehow, even this playthrough is different. Nico calls out our name. They don't know why, but we know exactly what that means. For some reason, we also immediately start with the strange journal in our inventory, which you normally only get from a vault later. The password for the computer is different now too, because this time we get the code from some more files in our documents folder. In these files, the author explains the situation. For this run through of the game, we can choose to do things differently, or we can carry on as we normally would. Doing things differently would be risky, but it might be the only way to get a happy resolution, whatever that means. And finally,
the Messiah, the world, my children. Is that like a metaphor for everyone, or is that literally just his children?
in this note, we can find the hidden code Solstice, which can also be found hidden in the Steam page of the game. Calamus also mentioned Solstice Day before, so it's definitely a recurring motif. With the code in hand, we log on to the computer again. The entity actually goes off script here.
Now, normally what happens is you only have one shot. That's what normally comes up. No, oh, okay, this is interesting. No, this does not feel right at all. Have we already been through this, Thomas? But that should be impossible. You only had one shot. I wasn't supposed to exist after that. Yeah, sorry, we kinda just deleted the fact that you didn't exist.
After that though, everything seems relatively unchanged from the first playthrough. Sure, some of the dialogue options are different.
When I woke up in the house, for some reason I called out a name. Thomas. I'm not sure why I did that, but then I saw it on a computer too. Ah, that would be our god. Oh, right. I feel like I remember something about that. You do? But wait, did you not just arrive here? I was the one who was supposed to inform you of that. Oh no. So how did you know? It just makes sense. It made sense, I guess.
But in the end, most of it converges back to the original dialogue. The one exception is the head librarian George, who actually has 6 different personalities, represented by the number on her die head. And yeah, you can just replay the game like this. If you're missing some achievements, like I was, then this approach gives you as many chances as you need to get them all. Some of the ones I missed are actually pretty funny too. There's a secret room with a bunch of RAM and computer jokes.
This RAM doesn't react to me at all, except the word ba is written on its wool. That one isn't a RAM, that one is read only. Oh, that's a good joke.
You also get an achievement for playing the game while only using the buds to save, because that's how the old 2014 version worked as well. And if you want to, you can even choose the other option in the dilemma now, but I didn't, mostly because I needed it for an achievement. As I said, it's here that OneShot just becomes a video game again. Yes, your actions still have consequences, but they're not permanent anymore, so it ruins the entire point. Surely this can't be it, right? I mean, it feels like the game is holding back. Why else would we get this strange journal at the start of the game and not later? Why else would Nico call out our name? And the world still knows I exist. Well, if you thought we were done here, then you haven't been keeping track, because we've still got one more layer to cover. And let me tell you, if you thought the dilemma was a great plot twist, this next layer is about to turn your world upside down. One last time, I'm giving you a chance to evade spoilers. You're staying? Alright. And it's time to let the cat out of the bag. In a normal playthrough, Nico needs to enter the mines to grab an item for a later puzzle. We can't go over these rails though, because they're too unsafe for living beings. The head engineer Silver is with us during this scene and talks about how all of the mining robots were moved or repurposed after the sun went out. That is, barring one. Normally this conversation is quite unremarkable, as it isn't referenced again later. However, this time around, when we enter the mines, this happens. Silver says the robot we saw in the vision might have been the same one who went back to the mines. After this, the strange journal in Nico's inventory starts to light up. This must be a sign. Looking at the journal, there's now a picture of this room with a minecart in it. At this point I actually got kind of stuck on what to do. Maybe I'm just an idiot though, so see if you can figure it out. Did you notice this tiny clover on the ground? It wasn't there initially. After nearly giving up on this puzzle and doing some other stuff, I finally noticed it. Suddenly, a minecart spawns out of thin air, which we can ride to access a completely new area. The entity is not happy with this though, and encourages us to turn back. I think you still can, but if you choose to push forward, there is no more turning back. Nico goes in deeper on their own, and we meet a new character. Yeah, if you thought this was going to be anything similar to the last session, you are sorely mistaken. Now, at this point, the game throws a copious amount of new lore at you, and with that, I mean more than 20 minutes of it. I'll try to do my best to summarize it, but this is still best experienced on your own first. The robot asks how Nico got here, and in response, they hand over the strange journal. The robot then gives this cryptic response. Before telling us anything else though, it wants us to restore its backup. This is done with a puzzle that normally involves backtracking to an earlier area, but I cheated a bit and just looked at one of my old recordings. Did I miss something important because of that? Maybe. Anyway, we insert the backup and the robot introduces itself as Prototype, the original Prophet bot. If you recall from earlier, the Prophet bot we encountered was never tamed. Well, as you might have noticed, Prototype definitely is able of talking more freely, so it's heavily implied that he is tamed. Also,
I was built before the real world ended.
God, that silence hits hard once again. We won't get an explanation on what he meant quite yet, but something else important happens. Prototype makes Nico remember everything. You could say they had amnesia for something that happened in another timeline. With this revelation, I now officially consider Nico to be a meta-level character. And while we're here, let's talk about Prototype's meta-level aspects. He's not just aware of the real world, whatever that is, but also of me as the player. So, is everything not real then? No, Nico is. And in fact, that's the only reason the program can even run. You see, this program has the weird quirk that it cannot run on its own. That's strange when you think about it. It reminds me a lot of the introduction to a textbook on programming I had to read a while back. You can think of a way to solve a problem, write that thought down in detail as a program, and that problem gets solved. It can be solved again and again because the program can be used independent of you. Your thoughts live on as an entity that actually implements them. But for whatever reason, this program, OneShot.exe, does not work like that. Even though this is a hard concept to grasp, especially for a child who is inside of the program, Prototype does a great job at explaining it in a way that makes sense for Nico. This is one of the major strengths of the writing in this game. We still don't know who designed the actual program though. Nico wrongfully assumes it's me, but that confusion is quickly cleared up. Turns out it was actually the author who created the game. However, he didn't want it to turn out this way, but due to an immense amount of glitches, it ended up in this state. That explains why he's been helping us, or as Prototype puts it,
the creator is mobilizing things, throwing everything into this one last shot.
Wow, what a way to recontextualize the game's title. One last shot. It's genius. After that whole ordeal, Prototype asks us to continue playing the game as normal and pretend that none of this happened. That's a tough ask, but sure, we'll do it. However, when we head back, disaster strikes. The entity just remembered everything. Even though it wasn't able to follow the conversation with Prototype, it can feel that Nico is upset. This puts it in a state of disarray, and square particles start appearing everywhere. The caves start collapsing as everyone takes the emergency exit that leads straight to the glen. Unfortunately though, the head engineer is squared to death, and Prototype's body is as well. Luckily he gave his main memory disk to Nico just in time, and they escape in the minecart. Okay, that was a lot to take in. In these moments, I really started to think differently about the role of the entity in all of this. Instead of being a nihilistic bastard whose only goal is to save Nico, I now felt that it was simply misinterpreting the situation. The entity is looking at the pain that Nico is feeling and concludes that the author must be torturing him in some way. Well, really, the author's only trying to help save everyone. That's something the entity is not currently capable of comprehending though. He's only looking at this in the short term. As for Nico, they are distraught as well. Both of their companions just died in front of them, and they start to doubt the player as well. Not only are they physically alone, but they're also lonely in their thoughts. Every other character in the game is either a simple NPC, dead, or a meta-level character that cannot communicate with Nico. And I, as the player, am powerless. I can offer mental support to them, but nothing physical. This shot in particular is powerful, and perfectly represents Nico's feeling of just pure loneliness. I haven't cried at a piece of media in ages, and this was no exception, but damn is this scene still unsettling. In the end, Nico manages to escape to the Glen. We'll have to tackle this region differently now too, because the passage to the refuge is entirely covered in squares. I sense you're probably in need for something to lighten the mood, and luckily there was one thing that happened here.
Nice. Never knew it'd be so easy. Oh, my foot, ow. Oh, you know the thing? My foot is sleeping right now. This is actually... Oh my god. I think Nico and I are linked.
We don't get to laugh for long though, because Calamus and Alula's home is now ravaged by squares as well. They'd like to head to the burial grounds instead, where their mom is buried, but that would mean we'd have to cross this massive stretch of water. It's here that another divine intervention from the author happens, much in the same way as the minecart in the Barrens. Nico gets a vision of someone, the strange journal lights up, and by opening it while standing on this clover, a boat appears out of thin air. Hey, it looks like things might turn out well after all.
Strange to think that these two will also probably die.
Why did you have to say that, past mad lad? Anyway, upon arriving, we meet Cedric, the meta-level character for the Glen. We again get a lot of dialogue here, but the premise is this. Cedric is the author's son and came here by crashing his flying machine. Before he explains anything else though, Nico is first tasked with finding the right items to repair the... not a plane, I guess. We do so, and Cedric explains what's up ahead. If you remember the fox from our last playthrough, who refused to talk to us, you'll know it asked us to return to this world if possible. This is now relevant. Apparently her name is Rue, and we'll meet her in the refuge shortly. Cedric's explanation starts roughly where Proto's left off, with some overlap for clarity. This specific patch has clearly become much more unstable than any previous iteration. It's the typical phenomenon where fixing one bug in a video game creates 10 more. It's here that we get a major eye-opener, which again is accentuated by silence and then music. The author, Prototype, Cedric, and Rue are not part of the simulation, but were instead brought in from the old world. This world was destroyed a long time ago by some unspecified disaster. Climate change? Anyone? This is what Proto meant when he said he was built before the real world ended. Anyway, in the old world's final moments, the author did not give up and instead made an attempt to make the entire thing into a machine, namely the World Machine. A daunting task that miraculously proved successful. The code then managed to survive past the end of the old world. It then drifted in the ether until I installed the game onto my machine. Yes, I know this whole drifting thing feels like sorcery, but the story simply wouldn't function without this, so I'm willing to suspend my disbelief here. As you can probably imagine, simulating the whole world requires immense processing power, and they didn't have that. So this is why there needs to be a living person in the loop, as well as a good enough laptop. Initially, the living person was the author himself, but as he said in our previous run, he already left the world. So at this moment, the world is hanging on by a cat's whisker, and with that I mean Nico, and I myself am just an operator. That's all Cedric has to say for now. He and Nico now take off towards the refuge, promising that I'll come back for Calamus and Alula later. Even after everything that's happened, Nico experiences pure joy being on this plane, because you have to remember, there's still a child. It probably also helps that Cedric understands his concerns, which we did not have in the Barrens. But just before Cedric's about to leave...
No. 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 Oh, they're dead. They're just gonna die on that island. Well, there goes the hopeful thing I was talking about. Man, this game really knows how to give you emotional whiplash.
It's incredibly unfortunate, but we must move on. Cedric leaves to reconstruct Prototype, taking his main memory disk with him. As for Nico, the elevator that normally takes them to the surface is not having its best day ever, so we again need to find another way. One room I did not mention in Layer 1 is this place with a locked door. In our first playthrough, it looked like this. but now it's lit up and it says 0. I was initially confused at what this was, and the dialogue from the clock person did not help me either, but here's the deal. I haven't mentioned this yet, but the Solstice ending was patched into the game on the 27th of March 2017, which, by the way, is not anywhere close to the summer or winter solstice. It's actually much closer to the spring equinox, which falls around the 20th of March each year. As a fun fact, equinox literally means equal night, referring to the fact that on this day, the day and night last for roughly the same amount of time anywhere on Earth. Funnily enough, on the 20th of March there was actually an update, but it was a smaller patch that changed some of the dialogue. Hey, it's Madlad from the Edit here. As it turns out, that smaller patch I just mentioned was actually planned to be the full Solstice update, but due to unforeseen circumstances, it had to be delayed by a week. I found some old videos from the time, and I must say, the way the developers handled this issue is perfectly in-universe. Like, it makes complete sense given the characters and the situation. So I've included those videos in the description because I think they're well worth a watch. Anyway, all that rambling aside, the countdown was actually counting down to the release date of this patch. I wasn't around for that though, so that's why my counter says 0. And the dialogue from the Watcher is actually just a lie. She merely believes that the world will end once the countdown reaches 0, but there's no evidence to support this. We can now open the secure door by again inputting the code Solstice. Luckily for us, there are 2 elevators here. One of them's locked, but the other one works just fine. Arriving near the tower, we can now head to the library, and the middle-aged worker is trapped. There's nothing we can do about it though. In the library, Kip and George really want Nico to stay there for safety, but we're on a mission, so they let us leave. Before doing that, Nico addresses the player again. Even though we can't reply, our mere presence makes them not afraid anymore. We head back to where Rue was the first time, and she immediately greets Nico with open arms, or paws in this case. Another long conversation ensues where really everything falls into place. For some reason I hadn't realized it yet, but the world machine and the entity are the same being. Not only that, but its connection to Nico finally becomes clear. As per the first law of robotics, a machine can never let a living being come to harm. The world machine only saw Nico as a living being though, not the world. Also, if you've been keeping attention, you'll know we haven't heard of the world machine since its mental breakdown in the Barrens. Like an artificial intelligence training on its own crappy training data, it broke down in a vicious cycle, and it all became a huge mess. On top of this, we finally get a detailed overview of what taming really is. You might have initially thought it was something more akin to Detroit Become Human, for example, where the androids bypass their code on their own and become deviants. Instead, in this game, it actually requires the presence of a human being and is more like how a relationship is built. I don't have any experience with that though, but Iris Murdoch saves us once again with an incredibly beautiful quote. Love is the perception of individuals. Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. In this case, the extremely difficult part is an understatement. If you want to tame a robot, not only do you need to bond with it, but you also need to wrongfully convince yourself that it is real, so that it starts to feel real as well. You could say a strong belief becomes knowing. It would explain why only a small minority of the robots in this game are tamed. Most of the time, it's just not worth the effort. All of this does raise an interesting point though. Is the world machine tamed? Before we can answer that question, Cedric returns after reconstructing Prototype. With Cedric, Rue, and Prototype now here, we solve another meta-level puzzle that allows us to open a hidden door. It leads us to the author's study, but immediately we head up and enter somewhere. Apparently we're inside of the world machine's head now. If you recall, it doesn't have a physical form though, so right now it's using images of Nico to talk to them. Now, this is one of the most emotional and probably the best written exchange in the game, so I'm definitely not going to be doing it justice with the summary. Our earlier observations about the world machine are mostly confirmed here. It broke down in the Barrens because it was afraid that Nico was unwell. Its long absence afterward was not just caused by a breakdown, it was literally outside of the protocol, which meant the world machine couldn't monitor it. And as for the glitches, those actually started off on purpose. Just like a child playing and testing the boundaries of possibility, the world machine broke small parts of its own code out of curiosity. Can you blame a child for being too curious? Curiosity did end up killing the cat though, because eventually the corruption started spreading to other parts of the game, a bit like a metastatic cancer. But then, can you really blame the author for only noticing it when it was too late? He was an overwhelmed father. The world machine reflects on how it has been unable to bring Nico back home, but they reply that that won't fix the root of the problem. It's here that something truly remarkable happens. In a stroke of pure genius, Nico is able to convince the world machine that the world is real.
You said this session wasn't in your code, right? Yeah? So if this session wasn't supposed to happen, if even you didn't know what to do, how would the characters, how did the people know how to respond? That is true.
Not just that, Nico proves that the world machine had been tamed all along. It just hadn't realized it. It had gone through all the steps, like you may have noticed it didn't talk in all caps or capitalized words, but it never got any positive feedback from a real human being. Nico gave the machine the validation it didn't know it needed all along. And now the world machine can sustain itself without Nico or me having to be there. It then remembers what the intended ending for this game was supposed to be and how there was never even meant to be a choice. The characters are restored, the world can survive on its own, and simultaneously, Nico can head home. What a brilliant conclusion to this story, isn't it? We are now almost able to answer the question from the start of the video. What is OneShot truly about? But first, Past Mad Lad would like to tell you something.
I just wanted to say I actually did know there will be a good ending. It's really stupid. I was watching a Markiplier video. Code told me that Markiplier never got past, the first playthrough of the game. They never realized, just like me basically at the start, that you could do this again. It's been 7 years since he's played it, and the comment section of his videos is like so many people asking him to finish the game. And one of the comments said, "Hey, you can get both." And I was like, oh no, I'm not going to read the rest of that. I just scrolled back up really quickly, just didn't read anything else. So I didn't know that there would be a true ending, but actually experiencing it is something else, of course. I was actually watching a video recently about getting over it, and most of you probably know the reward at the end, but that doesn't really matter. Even if you know what happens, even if you know there is a true ending, actually experiencing, actually seeing how it unfolds is the actual worthwhile part. And I had a strong belief that there would be a good ending, and I've said this already, but a strong belief is like knowing, right?
It is with this quote that we can return to the original question. Whatever the answer is, it needs to be a theme that is omnipresent throughout the game. So for example, while my stupid allegory about climate change works in some places, the analogy became irrelevant during the Solstice ending, indicating that the story was never really about that. Or, in other words, it ain't that deep. So, what is still present in Solstice, then? Well, in my opinion, 3 words. Faith in reality. Let's break that down piece by piece. The concept of faith has been on our radar since Layer 2 already. There, I specifically talked about the many parallels you can draw between Nico's story and that of Jesus Christ. But the references to Christianity go deeper than that. In Layer 3, I briefly talked about how each clover in the game has 3 leaves, never 4. This could be a reference to the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, where the stem of the clover connects them as being appearances of one true God. If you think that link is far-fetched, think again. St. Patrick supposedly used a clover to teach the natives of Ireland about the Holy Trinity. So, as my English teacher would say, this is common knowledge. Even if you're not Christian, heck, even if you're not religious like me, you have certain beliefs and values. The game tested those in Layer 4 by asking the player to make a choice between Nico and the world. This man took our faith for an answer, but it never actually mattered what that faith was. There's also an admittedly weak link to the cyclical nature of Layer 5, the fact that we can replay the game as much as we want. Religions like Hinduism have a cyclical notion of time, so their belief in reincarnation sounds a lot like the fact that Nico keeps being brought back to the world. Oh, by the way, speaking of Layer 5, I guess I haven't said this, have I? So, if you restart the game after completing Solstice, the World Machine offers you the option to replay the game once again. Now, considering Nico is truly gone, it'll only be a recording though, where the World Machine takes the place of Nico in all of the dialogue. Doing this effectively puts you back in the Layer 5 state. The one difference is that you cannot replay Solstice. Oh, don't worry, I haven't gone off topic this time, because that structure actually has to do with faith. According to many people, you die once and spend the rest of eternity in heaven or hell. You can't die twice, so why should you be able to replay Solstice? It was the true ending after all. Notice how the name Solstice isn't randomly chosen either. In the Northern Hemisphere, winter solstice, that's when the days are the shortest, happens around the end of December.
And then you know what else is celebrated around that time? Christmas!
There are a lot more references I could cover, but I'll restrict myself to one more motif. Look at this portion of the game's trailer. What singular thing is prominently present in nearly every single shot? Light. Light is what the world needs to carry on, not just in a literal sense, but metaphorically as well. Why else do we talk about a beacon of hope or the light at the end of the tunnel? With light, we're not only able to see our surroundings, but to empathize with the people around us. That's what Nico is doing in this game. They show that there is still light to be found in this dark world, and share their knowledge with the World Machine at the end. Now it is time to analyze the second part of our statement, reality. We also met this theme back in Layer 2 in kind of an indirect way. There we talked about the role computers and machinery play throughout the plot. That motif gradually evolved further and broke the fourth wall. In Layer 3 the game escaped its confines and began manipulating the player. In Layer 4, the choice you made had permanent consequences, and there was no correct choice or happy ending in sight. That's one of the main selling points of reality.
Did I really just say selling points? Come on.
But most importantly of all, the Solstice ending is all about the real world. It urges us to question what the world's real and fake truly mean. Is a robot a valid individual? Is a simulated world any less real than the one we're living in right now? And by extension, is the world we're living in right now even the real world? The answer the game offers is that anything is real, as long as you believe in its existence, in the fact that it exists. Well, that's not a word, I just made that up, but whatever. Nico is real because we can imagine them having a life outside of the game, to the point where closing the application feels morally wrong in some way. The World Machine is real because it possesses emotions and values just like a human would, even if it didn't realize that right away. And that belief in the existence of the world brings us right back to the big picture. Faith in reality. By believing the universe we participate in is the true one, we actually define what reality is. Namely, it is this universe which we believe is real. Can we prove that it is real? Well, I haven't encountered any glitches in my hometown, but that doesn't mean they can't appear later. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it's an undecidable problem. We cannot prove that this is the real world. However, you mustn't forget that a strong belief is like knowing.
And who cares that physicists have supposedly proven that reality doesn't exist? What am I experiencing then right now, huh? Non-reality? I don't think so, Chief.
Going back to Iris Murdoch's quote, recall how she said love is an extremely difficult realization. However, the writing in this game made it trivial to love the characters, and to believe that they're real people. And because of that belief, we helped the people as much as we could, and they helped us back. Would we have lent out the same kindness to a random scattering of pixels on the screen? No, of course not. But this specific scattering was special. It was made with intent, by human beings.
Reality, it's contagious.
Hi, it's me from the edit again. I initially ended the section here, but since writing the script, I have a couple more things I'd like to add. Throughout this section, you might have noticed I'm deliberately avoiding the issue of generative AI models. That's because I view them differently. While I do value OneShot as quote-unquote real because of what I just said, AI-generated media just aren't. Like, I can't imagine ChatGPT having a life outside of the computer, but I can do that to some extent for the characters in this game. So to be clear, what I've said so far does not at all apply to AI. I just wanted to add that because I know someone will inevitably ask about it. There's one more thing I'd like to talk about in regards to faith in reality, but we'll have to take a small detour first. When we pass through layer 4 and use our OneShot, we're actually an evaluator in the Turing test. So just so everyone's on the same page, this was an exam devised by Alan Turing to assess how closely a machine can imitate a human. In practice, however, it mostly demonstrates how easily people can be fooled by human-looking responses. I'm glossing over a lot of the details here because I want to get to the main point. The choice in OneShot is not unlike the Turing test, because we're effectively deciding whether we think Nico and the world can pass off as real people. If at the time you were like the entity and thought only Nico was real and the world wasn't, then your choice was easily made: save the real person. If like me, you think both Nico and the world truly exist in some sense, then both Nico and the world pass the Turing test, and the choice becomes a bit more difficult. Ultimately, whether you think the characters are real is only one variable in your beliefs, values, and morals, and others might weigh more heavily for you. Regardless, faith in the existence of the characters is a lot like letting those characters pass the Turing test. Or if you've played Detroit Become Human, maybe the Kamsky test is more appropriate. Anyway, I've been rambling for too long now, so let's wrap this all up.
In conclusion, OneShot is built up of many layers, which I'll now summarize with this dumb analogy I made at 1 AM. Layer 0 is knowing that glasses of water exist. Layer 1 is drinking from one. Layer 2 is realizing that the glass is actually a bit deeper than you thought at first glance. Layer 3 is realizing that the cup or the glass was actually just a projection. Wow, didn't expect that, huh? Layer 4 is deciding what to do with that information. Okay. Layer 5 is drinking from the glass again, even though it was just a projection. Okay, I'll suspend my disbelief on that one, sure. Layer 6 is realizing that I actually made the whole scene in Blender, which, you know, makes sense, doesn't make any sense, so yeah. And then the center of it all is going outside and touching grass. Did we really need an hour-long video to just come to that conclusion? No, this analogy sucks. Just leave it be.
Unlike that stupid analogy, the layers in OneShot were well thought out and cohesive. Games like this will remain a part of the video game zeitgeist for as long as we value cohesive and meaningful stories. Which is to say, OneShot is a timeless piece of art. Of course, nothing lasts forever, but just like the old world, the game will still keep existing in some form, even if the original version may be lost to time. The game has already touched the hearts of so many people that there will most likely always be someone who makes sure to keep it alive.
To end, I have one more message for you, the viewer. I've tried to convince you of many things throughout this video, but it's okay, even encouraged, to disagree with some of the points I made. I'll admit it, some of my arguments were pretty weak, and others were just completely unhinged, but that's my nature, I guess. Anyway, I hope there was at least one thing that stuck with you. Maybe it was something about this game that you hadn't yet appreciated, or a life lesson that you weren't expecting to learn. Whatever that thing is, all I ask of you is to hold on to it as a memory. I'll grab an analogy to make this clear. Just like Nico and I haven't forgotten about the world of OneShot, I implore you to not let go of this nugget of information or inspiration. For memories too are real. Cherish them while you can. Thank you so much for watching. Have an awesome rest of your day, and keep being mad, lads.